Hello and welcome to Boise Entrepreneurial Week, session on intellectual property law. My name is Brad Frazer. I'm a partner at the Boise law firm Hawley, Troxell. We are pleased to sponsor and support Boise Entrepreneur Week. We've sponsored and supported it for a number of years, and today I think we've put together a really terrific program on intellectual property. We have David Lee from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and my good friend and client, Steve Browning from Blue Spring Partners, called FinFun in Eastern Idaho. So we're going to have a discussion together with David Lee from the United States Patent and Trademark Office about what that office does and what intellectual property is. And then we're so lucky to have the benefit of Steve's guidance today, because Steve and I have worked together for about 10 years from the time he and his brother formed the company as a brand new startup. And we worked together on, among other legal issues, his intellectual property portfolio. So he's the guy where the rubber really meets the road. Steve has actually done the things we're going to talk about today. And so I think you'll get some good insights from a successful entrepreneur who actually understands and uses intellectual property. So with that, let's begin with David Lee. David, welcome. You are in which office of the United States Patent and Trademark Office? The acronym for our audience is USPTO, or just PTO. David, what office of the PTO are you in?
I'm over here in the Rocky Mountain Regional Office, which is based in Denver. It covers a 9-state region. I usually say the donut around Wyoming, so the Dakotas down to Kansas, over to Utah, and up to Montana.
So, David, I thought all PTO functions occurred in Washington, D.C. You mean to tell me you have an office in Denver, Colorado? That can't be. How long have you been over there hiding away from us here in Idaho?
As things may have it, the American Invents Act is celebrating its 10th year, actually. And through that act alone, 3 other regional offices were created. The original satellite office or regional office was created in Detroit, Michigan, close to 10 years now. We've been in our location for 7 years.
David, it's so good to know, and I'm sure our listeners will be happy to know that there is a regional office of the Patent and Trademark Office just 12 hours away by a short road trip across Wyoming to the Denver regional office. So, David, we're so glad to know that that functionality exists and that you have that regional office, and that you and your companions will come to Idaho and do personal trainings, and you come to our fair state often, David. So we're glad to know that that resource exists, a regional office in Denver. So David, with that, tell us a little bit more. What is the USPTO's function? How does it help entrepreneurs and inventors? And then after that, perhaps you could give us, our listeners, just a brief overview of what patents are and what trademarks are. These are things that may not be familiar to many of our listeners. So first of all, what's the PTO function? What do you do, and how do you help inventors?
Sure. So there's multiple things that the office actually does. What most people would probably associate with the functions of the office itself is to examine patent and trademark applications. Issuing patents and registering trademarks is the biggest function. It's what our business essentially is driven on. We're a fully fee-funded agency, which means no taxpayer money. So all of the money that comes in to the agency is based off of user fees. I'll briefly go over the patents and the trademarks and the other forms of intellectual property after this, but we have 13,000 employees spread throughout the nation. Almost every single state has an employee of the USPTO. Our regional office has about 100 people from the agency, so 100 out of 13,000 is not very much, but it gives us the ability as a regional office to kind of go into more of a regional focus. We allow ourselves to get familiar with cities like Boise and Salt Lake City, some of the places that headquarters may not often go out to, so that we can educate the public as well. That's the other function, especially of our team. Myself, my director, Molly Kachowski, which many of you may have met in the past, our regional outreach officer, Julie Reavers. We go out and educate people and kind of meet them where they're at. And so whether it be STEM, K through 12, we do projects and learning through that avenue. Through entrepreneurial weeks or startup weeks, we usually go out there and kind of talk about what's the importance of IP. How does that benefit your company, and how important that is to obtain funding, or how, whatever avenues that you have questions in regards to that. SBR road tour is a big thing if you're trying to get funding from government agencies. That's something that usually, travels throughout the U.S. Every, few years it might hop through Boise, but there's regional locations that it does focus on. And then, of course, everybody now knows Shark Tank. You always hear about patent portfolios or, IP portfolios and the importance of that. With that, I see that the slide is up there for the overview of IP here. IP is just a shorthand for intellectual property. We have an 8-part series called Path to a Patent. Obviously, 8-part series there and an 8-part series of trademarks is not something that we can really get full attention in a 30-minute presentation, but I'll quickly go through some examples of some of these things so that you get a basic idea if you're watching this presentation. Patents in general, those are the avenue to protect the ideas for processes or things. Processes to make things, sometimes even plants. I'm sure Simplot may have some plant patents out there for some kind of potato hybrid or something like that. But so if you think of a widget or some kind of gadget, usually the form of intellectual property behind that is going to be a patent. Next on that list, there's 3 types of patents there: utility, design, and then plant patents not shown. Design patents are a whole nother entity in SOAR patents. So most often people are going to be familiar with utility patents. Second major category in that list is copyrights. Those protects works of arts. You see that list there. But lots of things can be copyrighted. Your instructions to a recipe or software code, dances, statues, art. The list goes on in terms of that kind of protection there. The Library of Congress actually handles copyright protection and not the USPTO. Maybe one day, the offices will all be combined and all intellectual property will be covered under one office. But currently, the Library of Congress takes care of copyright registration. Trade secrets are just secrets that you kind of keep. Google's search algorithm, that's an example of that. The Colonel's secret recipe, Coke formula, those are examples of trade secrets that businesses want to keep kind of to themselves so that it's not exposed to the public. Part of getting a patent or a trademark in general is you have to let the public know about it. That's how you get the protection. As long as you kind of submit it to the public, then you get that protection. It's a quid pro quo system there. And then finally, trademarks, something Brad is obviously very familiar with. Lots of things. There are designations for companies, for services. They can be logos. They can be slogans. They can be the blue field. They can be UPS Brown, Tiffany Blue, the NBC chimes. But whenever you hear or see some of these things, it puts your mind to what company is really using those colors or those sounds or those slogans. That's a quick overview of what IP is. We'll have resource slides later on. If you want to find out more about those forms of intellectual property, then join us for our series there.
David, that's a great overview. Let me just make sure that we don't have any other slides in your deck, David. I think that might be it. And I know Steve has some slides or some videos for us later as well. Oh, there we go. So there is an additional startup resource slide that you can find at uspto.gov/startups. So David, thank you. So David, let me ask you a quick question. Can one of our listeners who is an inventor or an entrepreneur, can he or she call you for legal advice, for patent advice? What can you help? And you personally, or the office there in Denver, what can you help an entrepreneur with if they were to call or email you?
Since we're the ones that are examining the applications, usually we do not offer legal advice. What our office can do, though, is kind of prepare you, answer your questions, help you through the process of application, pretty much, getting you some background, helping you with some searches, kind of understand the different forms of intellectual property so that you are prepared to know that you want to file for a trademark or you have your invention ready and you're trying to file for a patent application. And so it'd be a conflict of interest if we were able to give you legal advice as well, but we are able to give you lots of other good educational tips in terms of your process.
And David, because you are a federal government agency, other than the filing fees that people pay to file a patent application or a trademark registration application, do you charge for your time or your advice?
Nope. That's the good thing about being in the government. All this is free. There's lots of late night ads that, 1-800 do this, get a patent, or file a trademark.com. While those are maybe useful for some, our education comes free. Anytime you want to reach out to us, then we offer, the ability to do one-on-one kind of counseling sessions, essentially, about all your questions, or stakeholder interaction is always at the forefront of our team for sure. If you want to schedule that, you go to Rocky Mountain at uspto.gov, send that email there, and then contact us, and we can set you up there.
What a tremendous resource, David. I'm sure everybody listening to this will be glad to know that the Denver office is there and that you have all these tremendous resources for inventors and entrepreneurs. So with that, David, let me transition over and talk about, as I mentioned earlier, someone who has real world experience with the academic principles you were just discussing, my friend and client, Steve Browning. Steve is, Steve, I don't want to steal your thunder. Let me ask you. I'll ask you to tell us a little bit about you, Steve, and about your company and how you got started. But first of all, Steve, what is your current title over there at FinFund?
Well, currently I'm CFO. In fact, that's been my title the whole time. But my brother and I are really the co-managers of the company.
And if that, I had forgotten that you've been the CFO the whole time, Steve, so forgive me. So when did you and your brother, Steve's brother, Eric Browning, I knew when we both worked at Micron back in the day. Steve, tell us how you and Eric decided to form Blue Spring Partners, and which has, as you know, a trademark, FinFund. What is your origin story there, Steve?
Well, the company began from an idea that sprang out of my niece, Emily, when she came to my mother, we call Grandma Karen, and asked her if she could make her a mermaid tail, one that she could actually swim in. And at first, Grandma Karen was a little skeptical, but they worked together. They came up with a design, and they had a tail for her to wear, and she took it to the local pool. And before you knew it, she was back saying her friends all wanted one. And before you knew it, a business was created. My parents, Jerry and Karen Browning, in 2010, went on eBay and started selling these one at a time. And before you knew it, they'd sold several, and it just grew from there. And that was in about 2011. Eric and I joined the company in mid-2012. We wanted to give them the opportunity to retire, finally. They were in their 70s at this point. And they're entrepreneurs extraordinaire. They've started more than 20 different businesses over the course of their life, and they were finally able to go and serve a mission for their church. And Eric and I took it over. When they got back a year later in 2013, they saw things were going so well that they decided to stay retired, and the rest is history.
It's a great story, and that's a great timeline that you've prepared and are sharing there with us, Steve. And I remember it was probably about that time then, 2012, that you and I and Eric either traded emails or had that first call. And the question was, we've got this growing company over here in Eastern Idaho. Here's our product, these mermaid tails and related products. Let's talk about intellectual property. So, Steve, I've teased you many times that it's time for you now to go to law school because we've had this discussion about intellectual property so often. But maybe you could tell our listeners about how you grew an intellectual property portfolio, and if you're able to share what it consists of, what it looks like, and then maybe, Steve, how have you used that intellectual property portfolio? I think I have some ideas, but as the guy who's actually running the company, how have you grown your IP portfolio, and what has it done for you?
Well, we'll start where I left off with 2013. This was a fabric mermaid tail the kids were swimming with in the pool, and it was fun, and it was better than nothing, but it wasn't really as functional as Eric and I thought it should be. So we went looking around to try to find a monofin flipper, and I don't know if any of your audiences or you have used a monofin flipper to swim in, but it's just a single flipper that both your feet fit into, and then when you're swimming, you're doing a dolphin kick, so you look very much like a mermaid. And so we looked to see what was available, and there wasn't really anything that functioned well. It was either too heavy, too expensive, or had other problems. So we got together with an engineer and came up with a new design, and it was unique enough that it took off, and it really made a difference in our overall business. Kids went from enjoying it to loving it, and it became more widespread, easier to use, to swim in. And so about 12 months after we started selling it, we started to think, maybe we ought to patent this thing. And so we had conversations with you and with others, and realized, boy, we better get this in there. And we did get it filed, the application filed about a week beforehand. That's probably been one of the best decisions we ever made. One of the worst decisions was we didn't get it soon enough to benefit from the international patent protection. So we have that we can say is best and worst decisions. But beyond that, we've patented a number of other products, iterations on this design or new designs. We have a shark fin that boys get to wear on their back, and that was a unique design. So the original monofin and tail, that was a utility patent, and that did issue in 2015. And then the shark fin was a design patent, which also issued about 2016. And then we've just kind of built on that patent IP portfolio. And at the same time, approximately the same time, we worked very closely with you, Brad, to establish our brand, not just to have products that we protected intellectually, but to have our brand protected through trademark registration. And FinFun, of course, was the one that we focused on initially, and trademarked both the name FinFun, the words, and also the image, the design mark, in the colors blue and dark blue, and so we've trademarked both of those, and we've done it in multiple classes. I may be getting a little overly technical at this point, but that's kind of how it works with trademarks. It's not just one registration covers everything, because it doesn't. It depends on what you're selling, and that means you might have to register it more than one. Under more than one class.
Steve, let me just interrupt and make sure. Did you have a video, or did we have a video that we wanted to share at this point? I just wanted to make sure. I thought we may have had a video. I think
there was a video. We can show it now if it's ready.
Okay. If we have that video available, let's run that now.
"10 years of fun for everyone. 10 years of smiling faces, of special packages in obscure places. 10 years of imagination, of taking chances. 10 years of mermaids, mermen, and merdogs. 10 years of letters to Santa and from around the world. 10 years of dreaming on beaches, lakes, pools, and tubs. 10 years of birthday wishes, mermaid kisses. 10 years of making dreams come true. And here's to 10 more.
That is a great video, Steve. I think it well showcases your product, and it helps our audience visualize some of the things that you were talking about, the mermaid tail, the monofin, and some of those other things as well. We also know, Steve, that you've used other things besides patents. You'll notice, the audience will notice how beautiful those colors were in the tails, the patterns. And we know that we have used copyright law to protect the patterns that we use on the fabric. Tell me how many different, if you know, Steve, how many different fabrics and patterns do you have in your tails?
Well, we have, I'm sure, over 100 over the course of the 10 years that we've copyrighted. We also created a little group of mermaids called the Mermaidens, and we have nearly 100 stories about these mermaiden characters and artwork, all of which has been registered under copyright as well.
So in the intervening 9 years, we've amassed registered trademarks domestically and internationally. We've got issued patents. we have got registered copyrights. Steve, tell me about around the world, what have you seen in terms of infringers and copycats around the world copying your product? What have you seen?
Well, that's been a real issue for us. Anything that's popular that does well, people are going to take notice and they're going to try to duplicate it and sell it. And so we've had a lot of issues with particularly companies based in China creating a lookalike or a very similar product and going on channels like Amazon and trying to sell it. Fortunately for us, in many ways, we've been very fortunate by having these patents and these trademarks and these registered copyrights that we've been able to utilize those to help us take down a lot of these competitors, particularly domestically. Internationally, we haven't been quite as successful because we don't have that patent protection, but we have had trademark protection as well as copyright protection, which has helped us out a great deal.
So, Steve, I know that you've used something called the Amazon brand registry to place your trademarks into the special place at Amazon to give you enhanced protections. Have you found some benefits from having registered trademarks in the brand registry at Amazon?
Oh, yeah, it has been very helpful. More recently than in the early years. I think Amazon has tried to become a little bit more friendly to the sellers, making sure that we are a legitimate brand, and that gives us a lot of credibility. And they will trust what we're saying more than if we weren't. And so it's been very helpful.
And then, as you also know, we've used a tool called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or a DMCA takedown notice. I think you're doing them internally now, but we've used those where someone is displaying a photograph or a fabric pattern that we have a registered copyright on. We can use tools like that to and help you maintain that lawful monopoly in the FinFun brand and products that you and Eric have worked so hard to put together. You mentioned your one regret was not getting the international patent protection. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Do you remember, Steve, exactly why that happened? What was the timing issue there? Our audience might be interested in that.
Well, the issue, I think, is that we didn't realize how popular this product would be, and we didn't start really thinking about trade or patenting the product until we saw more history, more actual volume. And so that's just in hindsight, we recognize we should have been a little more optimistic, perhaps, and gotten in sooner. By doing that, we would have been able to file internationally as well. It's just that our business was growing primarily domestically, so that's where our focus was, and then the international portion kind of followed. And so it was just a matter of the timing of things. But I think anybody who's thinking about filing a patent, if they haven't started selling it or haven't been selling it for more than a year, the sky's the limit, really. And it's just a matter of how much you can afford. And frankly, I would say if you don't feel you can afford what I would view as $10,000 might be a good base to think of. It's probably not the product that's really going to be as successful as you would like. So that's how I view it anymore. Is if we think it's a product that's going to be successful, then we're looking right away at domestic and international patent application.
That's great advice. I'm going to ask both of you as we're sort of winding down here, and I'll ask David first, but I'd like you both to think of this question. If you then were going to start a new business today, and Steve, you probably are thinking more about retiring and exiting than starting another one. But what advice would you give to an entrepreneur who was starting a business today? You have an idea for an app or a product, an Etsy store, a Shopify store. And I'll ask David first, then I'll come back to you, Steve, to give you a moment to think about it. What would your advice to an entrepreneur be with your experience as the CFO of FinFun, as your experience in PTO? And let me flip it back now to David Lee. David, what would you tell an entrepreneur if you were going to either start a company on your own or advise a startup entrepreneur relative to intellectual property best practices? David, what would you tell them today?
Bottom line, utilize your resources. The educational opportunities that are out there so that you can learn about expanding your businesses or how you obtain funding, just even getting started in intellectual property. Molly always says that the gateway drug to intellectual property is getting a trademark. That's a relatively cheap filing fee to get a trademark for your company. It's a great way to get started with, branding yourself or getting your business, ready to take off, essentially. The SBA has resources. Lots of government agencies have lots of great resources. There's a Patent and Trademark Resource Center out there in Boise at the, forgot what school that is downtown, and then the College of Law from Idaho out there is also the pro bono program. So that offers free legal assistance. If you're short on cash or short on, kind of the funding for your company, then utilize those resources, try to get your legal fees paid for at least. You still have to pay for your application fees and all the fees associated with the patent application, but there's opportunities that are, you're able to use out there. So definitely make most of what you can to get as much information as you can. Come to us. We can have those one-on-one sessions, like I mentioned. We have the boot camps for patents and trademarks, so you can learn as much as you can to kind of just, get your feet wet, understand the process, and then maybe file a provisional application. Listening to Steve's situation, had that been a provisional application from the beginning, he would have had a year to kind of think about where this was going, and then go full-blown patent application after that. So, just knowing what is out there and what you can make use of is going to be beneficial. Steve?
It's a great point, David. One thing I've learned over the years is that there really are a lot of free and low-cost resources available to entrepreneurs. We have in Boise here at Boise State University something called Venture College, which provides resources. The University of Idaho College of Law is right here in Boise with a USPTO, I think, branch office. I think that's where it's located, David. We have your office in Denver. We have online resources. We have the small business development centers. So there really are a lot of great resources. And I appreciate your comment about know your resources and know what's available. And shouldn't be that daunting to think that it's horribly expensive. I mean, it can be expensive, but to get started, there really are a lot of good low-cost resources. David, thank you for that insight. So Steve, with that minute to think, what would you now say, Steve Browning, to an entrepreneur who is getting ready to start a business? What advice do you have in terms of building brand, building product, building loyalty, Steve? What are your thoughts?
Well, I would certainly say, first off, take it very seriously. I think a lot of time and attention is given to marketing and business plans and things like that, but sometimes the IP portfolio is kind of given a second fiddle, and it should be a primary focus of your business. Because honestly, our objective eventually is to sell the company, and hopefully for a lot more than it costs us to invest in it. And a lot of that will depend on how much intellectual property we've created, and not just created, but protected, that someone can buy and place a value on and say, this is worth, your company's worth more to me now because you have this IP portfolio and it's protected as it is. So I would say primarily make it a priority and find the resources you need so that you can avoid the mistakes that we made. Get the experts, either those provided through the Patent and Trade Office or the attorneys who are expert in the fields that you're needing help with, and just do it right from the get-go.
That's great advice, Steve. And I won't ask you to reveal any confidences or breach a non-disclosure agreement, of course, but as you have perhaps spoken to people, and you've not only been the target of an acquisition, potentially, but you've also looked at buying other intellectual property. Yeah. Tell me your thoughts. Just a moment, if you would, Steve, on the buy side. What have your reactions been as you've looked at buying companies or assets in terms of how you've evaluated their intellectual property portfolio? Do you give it more weight and potentially pay more money if the seller has intellectual property?
Absolutely. We were looking at a company that was doing well on Amazon, had a great product, a nice fit to our company, but we looked and they did not have good patents or intellectual property. They didn't really have anything protecting their brand. Even their trademark wasn't one they were using actively. It was still something that was kind of floating around out there, but they hadn't registered their current trademark. So yeah, it was we didn't put the value on it we would have otherwise. On the other hand, we've had parties that have been looking at us, and we've had this and so forth, and it's clear that they want to know that this intellectual property has been protected. They want to know the patent numbers. They want to know the trademark. They want to see that trademark registration that you've got. So they want to see all that, and it does make a difference really in what the ultimate price would be.
This has been my experience as well, Steve. I know from both buy side and sell side that there is potentially an extra 1 or 2 zeros on that check, as I like to say, when you've got a good IP portfolio.
Yeah.
Let me just flip back to David Lee. David, do you have any contact information, a slide, or is there a way that people should contact you, or should we just direct them to USPTO? Oh, there it is right there. Here's a contact information slide for our panelists today. Steve Browning, you can tell, is a good guy, and I bet he'd be willing to take a call or an email from a young entrepreneur and offer some advice. There's David's information
Absolutely.
at the regional office over in Denver, and of course, there's my information as a partner at Hawley Troxell. Well, we hope that you are enjoying Boise Entrepreneur Week. We hope that this session on IP has been useful to you. Please feel free to reach out to me or to David or even to Steve if you have questions about how to take your ideas, protect them with intellectual property, monetize them, and then have that American dream of, selling your company or having an IPO. Hopefully that's the goal. Thank you all for participating today. David or Steve, any concluding comments?
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. Feel free to reach out to the regional office, Rocky Mountain at USPTO.gov, or you can go to USPTO.gov/Denver to find out any upcoming events that we may be having.
Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good day.